Yeah, a famous case from 19th century, railroad worker. That's right. Anyone else? Does anyone else remember?
Professor, I have a weird question. Can you answer it to me?
Sure, go ahead before we start. Yeah.
How to make your brain sharp?
Sharp like a knife.
No, not that much.
Well, I mean, today we're going to talk about sleep. Sleep is very important for cognitive processing and consolidating memories and just repairing the brain as well, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
from free radicals. But yeah, you have to, so sleep is very important, but you have to remember to, um, you have to eat well, of course, and you have to sleep well and drink lots of water, but you also have to study on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
So if you, let's say, if you study, if you don't study for 3 or 4 days, and then you binge study, or you study, a lot in 2 days, that's not going to help you. I mean, it's going to be better than not studying at all, but spreading out the information over the whole week is going to improve your studying, your retention of information, and your ability to think about that information. So that is, yeah, those those factors definitely will help.
Okay, I'll try it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then the other thing that helps is, let's say, after lecture today, or when you finish reading um, a chapter, test
Mhm.
yourself right away after you're done reading the chapter, or going over lecture notes,
Okay.
or watching the lecture notes. Yes. And if you have, and I would also recommend making a list of concepts that come up in each chapter on your own. So let's say, today we're going to talk about consciousness and sleep and dreams. So some of the so the concepts that come up this week or came up previous weeks, you can just write them down yourself, and then provide a short definition and maybe one example to that exemplifies or represents the concept. But you have to do it yourself. You have to write it yourself or type it in yourself. And yeah, so what happens is that when you write it yourself or you type it in yourself, when you have to think about it yourself, that of course solidifies the knowledge as opposed to just reading.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah. And then another trick you can use is, I used to do this. I used to have cue cards, like just physical cards, if you want to do that. And I put all the concepts on the physical cards, and I would keep them with me. So if I was on the train or on the bus or waiting in a store, in a queue, I would reach into my back pocket and I would look at the concepts. I would just review the information,
Mhm.
instead of looking at, let's say, people looking at their phones. You could be looking at study notes created by yourself, and
Hmm.
that's another way of rehashing. Even when you're, like, standing in the kitchen and waiting for something to do, without burning or without setting your place on fire, that is, because you're not paying attention, you can review your notes that you have created by yourself. So that also helps retain and memorize and retrieve information.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we were talking about Phineas Gage, right? And then we I think stopped at split brain patients. Yeah, we were talking about Phineas Gage. So remember, Phineas Gage suffered this terrible accident, but he was alive afterwards for many, many years. but his personality changed. So what was the correlation between specific brain parts and personality change? Do you remember which brain parts were most damaged?
Frontal lobe.
Yeah, the frontal lobes, and more specifically the prefrontal cortex. That is just in front of the frontal lobes or underneath, and in general frontal cortex and or frontal lobes on the left-hand side. And so it seems that prefrontal cortex and frontal lobes in general are responsible for which cognitive functions or which aspects of psychological life?
Logical way of reasoning and controlling emotions, I guess.
Reasoning, yes, it's very important. Controlling emotions, that's right. Or modulating or inhibiting emotions, yes. So when you get really angry without going into an outburst of emotion, you inhibit, you control, and prefrontal cortex works like that with the limbic system together. They modulate, they control each other, you could say. And in terms of logical thinking, he was basically he was unable to plan, execute. He was unable to engage in executive decision making and planning. You know, what should I do? First, I will do this, and second, I will do that, and third, you know, he wasn't able to set a plan and follow it, execute it from start to finish. He was undecided. So that's another ability that the prefrontal cortex or frontal lobes provide. Okay. Now the other case, very interesting case, but a quite telling case about how the brain, what happens in the brain, or when the brain is damaged or cut in some way, affects our psychological lives, is split brain patients. So in split brain patients, usually patients who suffer from epileptic seizures, that is, they can't, you know, during the day or during the night, they go through epileptic seizures, convulsions, and they can't control it. So this is basically the brain going through abnormal biological or physiological activity, chemical and electrical activity that moves back and forth between two hemispheres. So in order to control this, in order to stop this, one way in the 60s and onwards was to split the corpus, was to cut the corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum is a brain part composed of many neuronal fibers that connects the left hemisphere with the right hemisphere. So this is the corpus callosum. It's a pretty thick and dense section of the brain, and then underneath it you have the thalamus. Sorry, you have the limbic system, and then the thalamus, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and then you have the brain stem here. That it's composed of medulla pons and the reticular formation. You have the cerebellum here. And then the neocortex is all the stuff on the top, folded over together a few times. And then the brown areas are blood vesicles, and basically, vesicles that supply blood and nutrients to the brain. Oxygen and glucose especially. Okay, so this part of the brain is cut in the middle, so that there's no connection, so there's no information going from what enters the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere, and what enters the right hemisphere to the left hemisphere. So for example, if you So before I go on with examples, the results of the experiments were quite effective. That is, the patients who suffered epileptic seizures no longer complained that they suffer from epileptic seizures. So the epileptic seizures stopped or were reduced greatly. But what happens afterwards is that in some circumstances or some experimental setups, you can see that what enters the left hemisphere or what enters the right hemisphere does not cross to the opposing hemisphere. So in other words, the left hemisphere is not quote unquote talking to the right hemisphere, and the right hemisphere is not talking to the left hemisphere. So let's say if you see something with your left visual field and it goes to your right hemisphere, or if you see something with your right visual field and it goes to your left hemisphere, because remember the brain is cross-wired like this, even the eyeball, the information that's received through the retina and then the optic nerve through the optic chiasm or crossing is divided into two. So your each eye collects information from both sides of the visual field, left and right. So let's say you see something with your left visual field and it goes to your right hemisphere. Since the right hemisphere does not talk to the left hemisphere, and the left hemisphere is responsible for understanding and producing speech, there is no output that a person like this sees, let's say, a pencil. They won't say it if you ask them, because there's no way of communicating. They will register the visual information that it is a pencil, but this information, because the corpus callosum is cut in the middle, does not cross over to speech dominant hemisphere, the left hemisphere. But on regular basis, subjects or patients who had undergone the surgery function normally. But sometimes there are quirky incidents where patients, for instance, or subjects will, let's say, their left hand or their right hand will start buttoning up a shirt, and then the other one will start buttoning down or opening up a shirt. Or they might go to, patients like that might find themselves in a store where they reach for something and they want to put it in their shopping cart, and the other hand is returning it or putting it back on the shelf. Or maybe a patient becomes undecided whether they should put something in the shopping cart or they should take it out. So there are quirky, unusual incidences like that, but on average, patients are more or less normal and they can function. It's not that they have two types of personalities. It's just that sometimes, because there is lack of information exchange, they might seem undecided, or they might resemble or show that they are undecided, or they are really split between two decisions, whether to do something or whether not to do something, because there isn't a seamless and natural exchange of information between two hemispheres, the left one and the right one. So, for example, in an experiment like this, if you flash a word such as heart, but you divide it with a dot in the middle, so that the word heart is divided into he and art. So if what's in the left visual field goes to the right hemisphere, and what's in the right visual field, for instance, for example, art, goes to the left hemisphere, there is no communication between the two. So if the patient catches what's in the, let's say, what's on the right visual, or what's in the right visual field, that goes to the left hemisphere, the speech producing, comprehending and speech producing hemisphere, the patient would say that he or she sees or saw art. Not the whole word heart, but just art, because that was in the right visual field. And remember, what's in the right visual field goes to the left hemisphere. But then if you ask patients to point to the word that they saw, they point to, let's say with the left hand, to he instead of art. Okay, again, because there is no communication between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Okay, so you can create such experiments in order to reveal exactly that there is a lack of information exchange in the brain. But on regular basis, that does not happen often, because we move our heads, and we, even though the corpus callosum is cut, by movement in the environment, by moving our heads to the right to the left, we can compensate for the division or lack of communication between left hemisphere and right hemisphere with our visual fields. Okay, so that, you know, our visual fields on regular basis are not strictly divided to what's happening on the left hand side and what happens on the right hand side. Okay, it's not like there is a divide right attached to our foreheads, and that divides our visual fields. So on regular basis, when we move our heads and when we move our eyes, you can say we compensate for the parts that we don't see. And then in such cases, on daily basis, patients can understand the world and react to it in a logical or predictable manner, the way a normal person would. But if you create specific situations or specific experiments, then you can show that there's actually a problem in information exchange when it comes to what the brain is doing. So this is quite nifty and quirky, but it is a result of the fact that the corpus callosum is cut in a patient's brain, and there is lack of information exchange between the two hemispheres. And since the left hemisphere is responsible for comprehending and producing speech, it is whatever comes through the right visual field will be reported accurately, and whatever goes through the left visual field will not be reported, because it's not communicated to the left hemisphere that is responsible for speech production. So you can catch this phenomenon after surgery with specific experiments like these. Now, that doesn't mean that the right hemisphere does not understand language at all. It does understand language, but it's not responsible directly for language output. It may understand concepts, and it may engage in concepts representation, or what we call holistic understanding, as opposed to piecemeal fashion, the way it is represented, or such cognition is represented by the left hemisphere. But because language output takes place and comprehension takes place in the left hemisphere, you can create specific experiments to exemplify that there is lack of communication between hemispheres after the corpus callosum is cut, for the purposes to alleviate epileptic seizures. Okay, any questions in regards to this? No? So in the book, it says authors claim that split brain patients have really two streams of consciousness. And to some extent that is true, because you could say there are two streams of information, and there isn't perhaps one unifying stream because the corpus callosum is cut, the two hemispheres are severed. But there is still connection at the level of the brainstem and the limbic system. So the two hemispheres are connected below at the level of the brainstem and the limbic system, but just the fibers in the corpus callosum are cut. Okay, so it's not as if the patient or subject is truly cut into two. When it comes to information processing, it does receive two streams of information, and then the processing is separated in the brain because the two hemispheres are separated or severed, but the rest of the brain is intact, working together. Okay. Okay. So there is a bit of specialization when it comes to the two hemispheres. So the left hemisphere is good at making quick, exact interpretations of a language. For example, it's also responsible for language production, language comprehension, mathematical reasoning. The right hemisphere excels in making inferences or reasoned conclusions, helps fine-tune human speech. Okay, so the right hemisphere is equally important, but as you can see, it fine-tunes human speech. Okay, so our speech is actually better because we use our right hemisphere, but the main difference is that the language output takes place in the left hemisphere. And there are other differences, but the two hemispheres really work together. And in general, the consensus for the time being in psychological sciences is that the left hemisphere really views the world from a piecemeal fashion. You know, if it divides the world into smaller bits, and then engages in logical connection between the smaller bits. Okay. So for example, when you're working on a problem, you want to create some sort of a schedule. Or let's say if you are working on a project, you want to create a time frame of how you will finish a given project or an assignment. So that is piecemeal fashion. First, I will do this. Second, I will do this. Third, I will do this. Fourth, I will do this. And then the right hemisphere takes more of a holistic view and helps you decide, okay, I think this is a good plan. I think this works. I think this can be fit. I can fit this in my 3 or 4 week schedule. So again, the left hemisphere is much better at dividing the world into smaller bits and looking for logical connections between them. And then the right hemisphere is much better at a more general or holistic understanding what's happening around us or to us. Okay. Now, because in the case of split brain patients, it's not as if patients experience two streams of consciousness. They may experience two streams of information or lack of communication between the two streams of information. That is because one stream enters the left hemisphere, the other stream enters the right hemisphere, and there's no way of putting logically the information together or showing how information relates to each other together. But that does not mean that patients have two streams of consciousness. That is, left hemisphere is responsible for one stream of consciousness, and when it starts working, it's on, and then it stops working, it's off, and then the right hemisphere kicks in and creates a separate stream of consciousness. That's not the case. And the reason for that is that because the brainstem is connected and the limbic system is connected, and there are specific parts of the brainstem, such as pons and specifically the reticular formation, that extends upwards to the thalamus and that connects to the hypothalamus, that are important for triggering and maintaining consciousness or wakeful states of consciousness. And because such brain parts are not cut, they're not damaged, patients or subjects retain one global experience, conscious experience, but with two streams of information. Okay, so that is the difference between streams of information and streams of consciousness, or vis-a-vis a global unitary experience of conscious awareness. And this is the case also when you experience the world. You experience the world, even though your attention can shift, and attention is a phenomenon that works inside consciousness. Okay, you nevertheless have a unified experience of the world in space and in time. So time 1, time 2, time 3, time 4, or T1, T2, T3, T4 are joined seamlessly in time. It's not like your visual experience or auditory experience or your conscious experience of everything that happens around you is split. Okay, that's not the case. It flows, time flows, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but time seamlessly flows through consciousness. So it's not like you go outside and then 1 second you can see the world, and then there is a lag of no consciousness, and then your consciousness kicks in again, and on and off in such a fashion. That's not the case. When you go to sleep, you go into a different state of consciousness, and then consciousness to some extent stops, but not fully, because when we get to, as you will see in a few minutes, when we get to sleep and dreaming in this lecture, you will see that dream states are in some cases similar to typical wakeful states. They're bizarre, they are illogical, unpredictable, but you are conscious of events in the same way when you are conscious of events during waking life. All right, so that's important to remember, that split brain patients still retain and enjoy single unitary consciousness. There are no two, they don't have two streams of consciousness, but they experience two and sometimes unrelated streams of information. And because information exchange is prevented, you can set up specific experiments to reveal this. this lack of information exchange, that is. So cognitive neuroscience is a basically interdisciplinary study of the brain activity linked to cognition, including perception, thinking, memory, and language. By cognition or cognitive processes, whenever you see these terms or concepts in the book, cognition, cognitive, or cognitive processes, they refer to perception, thinking, memory, and language, and decision making. So cognitive neurosciences are interested in understanding the relationship between specific brain parts and specific brain activity with psychological states or cognitive states. For example, when people look at the world, when people think about the world or themselves, use memory and language, or engage in decision making. Okay. So consciousness is basically subjective awareness of the self and environment. So I'm conscious of myself and I'm conscious of environment. I can look inwardly, I can self-reflect, think about my actions, create a plan for the next week or 2 weeks. If I, think about something that I want to do next year, think about my behavior. Was it, let's say, if I engaged in, I engaged in a conversation 2 days ago, and I engaged in an argument with someone, and the opposing person, or the other person ended up mad at me or frustrated for whatever reason. Then afterwards, I can engage in self-reflection, self-awareness, where I can think about my actions, what I said, and I can assess whether the person's reaction or the other person's frustration was accurate or inaccurate, whether it was right or wrong, okay, fitting or not fitting. So we do this on a regular basis, okay, when we think about ourselves to ourselves, and when we think about daily occurrences, daily events in our lives. We dwell on them, and when we dwell, we self-reflect. Now, if people dwell too much, if people self-reflect too much, that can lead to anxiety and depression, okay? So it is important, so people who, let's say, withdraw from the world, and they don't want to leave their room for a week or 2 weeks at a time, then those are indications of either existing problems or problems that will be exacerbated in the future. But if we go through short temporary phases of, I don't feel like doing that, I don't really feel like meeting up with my friends today, or we go through moments of sadness or momentary states of depression, then that is quite normal. You don't have to be always upbeat in life, and you don't have to be always chirpy, elated, and happy. Okay, we go through a bit of an emotional roller coaster on a regular basis, maybe not with huge ups and downs, but less severe ups and downs, and they are and such fluctuations in moods are quite normal, so you shouldn't be alarmed. If you don't feel like doing something, or you feel a bit sad about, you might not even know the reason why, or not as engaged, let's say. But if that persists for a long period of time, and people start losing work, their relationships with each other start deteriorating, or students' schoolwork suffers from such states, then that should definitely be a red flag that something is not right psychologically. But short bursts, short temporary 1 day, 2 days here, where we are not as engaged or involved in the world, or maybe do not want to, or feel a little bit low or sad or a little bit blue, metaphorically speaking, that is fine. That is nothing to be there's nothing to be alarmed by. There's nothing to be afraid of. You just need to write it out, wait it out, and that's normal. Okay, so I digress a little bit, but just to give you, because I know students ask me this from time to time, is this normal? Is that normal? And when that happens, and being anxious about the world and oneself is also normal. It's about, but as you mature, you become better at managing your emotions, or better at understanding yourself and habits and the patterns that you either develop or need to change. But life can be quite stressful, and stress is a normal aspect of life. It's just that we need to learn how to curb it, how to manage it, how to plan our lives a little bit better, so that we are not as anxious in some parts or some moments. But anxiety is a normal, it's normal. It's, everyone feels it and experiences anxiety on a regular basis. But if anxious states prevent us from engaging in relationships, engaging from schoolwork, and engaging from work for a long period of time, then that becomes a problem. Okay, so enough about that. Let's move on. Let's go back to consciousness. So conscious awareness from the neuroscientific perspective is basically global efforts, global brain efforts. So consciousness is not located in one part of a brain. It's not located in one cluster, or it's not of a brain or clusters of neurons that are only responsible for triggering and coordinating or maintaining consciousness. It takes the effort of the whole brain together, working, resonating together, electrically and chemically in a specific manner to produce consciousness, or to produce dream states, or to, yeah. So it is a team effort on the account of your brain to produce consciousness. So, for example, patients who, let's say, due to motor vehicle accidents or to aneurysms or strokes, if they suffer specific lesions or strokes in their brains, some of their cognitive abilities might be lost. So let's say if there's damage to the hippocampus is partly responsible for forming new memories. Now, if there's damage to the hippocampus, patients might suffer amnesia. So let's say the inability to form new memories, short-term memory loss. That's what it's called. Or they might lose memories going back in time, let's say before, let's say 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But that does not eliminate consciousness altogether. Patients do not go into a vegetative state or coma or die because of specific damage to hippocampus or visual areas or the prefrontal cortex. As you remember with Phineas Gage, a substantially big chunk of his brain was damaged, but he maintained consciousness. He did not go into coma or vegetative state, and he did not lose life. Okay, so even though the brain may sustain specific damage or material damage, neuronal damage, it does not knock out or eliminate consciousness or conscious awareness of yourself and of the environment around you. But if you damage specific nuclei in the thalamus or in the brainstem, or if you cut the spinal cords, then that could result in coma, vegetative state, or brain death. okay, depending on how extensive the damage is. So we know that some parts of the brain are more instructive or are more important for producing consciousness and sustaining consciousness than other brain parts. But so that is the case. But consciousness can still be retained even though some brain parts are damaged. And specific clinical cases like amnesia or let's say blindsight. Blindsight is a phenomenon where there's damage to a specific part of the brain called V1 in the visual cortex. And patients who suffer such damage, they claim that they don't see objects. Let's say they're blind to chairs in front of them in a room. But if you ask them to walk through the chairs, 90% of the time they do it accurately. So there is information processing unconsciously in the brain in parallel with other parts of with other information processing. It's just that the information is not visually available. It's not available to awareness, okay? But such patients, even though they lose the ability to see objects or to be visually aware of the world, they can still hear the world, they can still touch the world, they can still make decisions and navigate through the world differently. That is, they don't lose consciousness, okay, altogether. Okay, are there any questions here? Let me just check the time.
Well, shouldn't we have to be notified that this course is not for counseling? Like, am I abnormal or something like that?
Say again?
Shouldn't we have to be notified that this course is not for counseling? You know, like, am I normal in this case? Something like that.
Oh no, I mean, it's not meant for counseling, but some of this information you can definitely use to self-reflect or to help you, right? Yeah. And that is why sometimes I say a little bit more to say a little bit more, because I remember what it was like to be a student, and some of the experiences that I have are quite common and they are similar to your experiences. So I just said that because students ask me sometimes, is this normal, is that normal? And yeah, some aspects of our daily lives and emotional swings are quite normal. So nothing to worry about, you just need to write it out and manage it. Okay. Now, interestingly, if you put patients who suffer from coma and vegetative state into a brain imaging, a scan, let's say an fMRI scan, and you ask patients who are vegetative or comatose, who do not respond to typical cues, sensory cues, right? They don't respond to you in any way, so that it seems that they are unconscious. If you give them, let's say, cues, verbal and visual cues, to imagine that they're playing tennis, or imagine that they are walking through walking through their home or their apartment, specific brain parts will show activity. So here you see patients, vegetative state patients or comatose patients, or what's called also minimally conscious patients. So in terms of ranking, comatose is the lowest or most severe, then you have vegetative state, and then you have minimally conscious state, and then recovery from minimally conscious state, and then back to typical consciousness. So patients who do not exhibit any conscious behavior or interaction with its environment still exhibit brain activity if you ask them to imagine. Okay, so this is quite telling. It tells us that the brain can still process information at the unconscious level, and something else needs to happen in the brain for that information to be conscious. Okay, therefore it supports the claim that consciousness is really a group effort, a team effort on the account of your brain, or brain in general, anyone's brain. So it is quite interesting. Some people have said, okay, well then, even though such patients do not show that they are conscious of information, do not indicate in any way that they are conscious, they could still be minimally, in some case, conscious. Okay, but it's very difficult to show, because such patients do not respond in typical way, right? So there are two conclusions to such experiments. One is that there is a minimal level of consciousness taking place in patients who suffer from vegetative state or comatose states, or that there is unconscious information processing. Certain parts of the brain do light up. So the brain is working on visual and linguistic cues, but it's unable to create any conscious output. So that information is basically being processed unconsciously. So that is here. Here you have two conclusions from such experiments. So these are very interesting experiments, and you can see the advantage of creating imaging techniques. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to know this, because if researchers just relied on clinical assessments, okay, the patient is not responding to any cues. If I ask a patient a question or where he or she is, do they know where they are? There's no output. There are no gestures. There is no bodily language. There is no language output, right? Which indicate that the patient is unconscious. But with the advent of imaging from the 1990s, now we can say we can peer into the brain. We can look into the brain and say, aha, there is brain activity. However, such brain activity is unconscious. Therefore, it is the patient, for instance, is unable, such a patient that is, for instance, is unable to communicate with the external world about what is happening inside his or her brain. Okay. Any questions here? And you can see that the activity, the brain activity in the patients is not identical to healthy volunteers, but it's close. Okay, so the brain activity in specific areas that are responsible for, let's say, imagining what it's like to play tennis or navigating through a spatial environment resides in specific parts of the brain, and it's activated. This is because we can see that there's oxygen or glucose consumption taking place, and all the other parts of the brain are not lit up, because here we want to basically, zoom in on specific brain activity. But having access to such information allows us to compare, compare what happens in a patient who suffers from vegetative state or comatose states with patients who are healthy, and to see what is the discrepancy in brain activity. Is it really big discrepancy, or is it much smaller discrepancy? So this is quite telling and quite important for people who conduct such experiments, and also for clinicians and healthcare professionals who provide therapies for people to get better. Okay, so I've mentioned that the brain, that our brains and our minds, because our minds are produced by our brains, or consciousness is produced, and many cognitive abilities are produced by brain parts, operates at a conscious level and unconscious level, or processes information consciously and unconsciously. So for example, sequential processing is processing one aspect of a problem at a time. So it is used mainly when you're focusing attention on one new or a complex task. Okay. So you do one thing, you do step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. But parallel processing, or processing that takes place at the same time, but through different streams, through different avenues, is processing aspects of a problem simultaneously, okay, at the same time. So the brain's natural mode of information processing for many functions. And so we do this on a regular basis. Even, simple examples, you go out for a walk with someone and you talk to them. Now, do you need to be consciously processing information, all the information around you? You can pretty easily navigate through an environment without paying attention to every detail at the same time, while at the same time conducting a conversation about a specific topic. So you can see that most of your attention, cognitive attention, or visual attention, or linguistic attention, is directed to the other person and the conversation that you engage in, but much less attention is devoted to all the other pieces of information, the environment that you're walking through, unless you come to some sort of obstruction. You're walking down the path and you see that there is, I don't know, there's a big puddle, or there is a tree in the way, or there's a group of people coming toward you. Then you pay attention to them and you navigate around them, or you somehow navigate around the problem. But for the most part, you are consumed by the conversation that you have. And that is where most of conscious attention lies. But all the other aspects are, you could say, in the background, but they are processed just as well. So the brain, your brain engages in parallel processing. As you're doing one thing, it is able to, maybe with not the same amount of skill or expertise, because perhaps some skill and some expertise or some cognitive tasks require more of your attention. Let's say, for example, driving. So I had a student a few years ago who said that it is possible to text while driving, and you can do both tasks equally well. And I laughed, because that is not possible. That's the surest way of getting into an accident very quickly. So what is in our even though our brains engage in dual processing or parallel processing, some activities are cognitively and behaviorally quite demanding, and you have to pay close attention to what you're doing, otherwise you will miss things. Okay, so driving a car is a very good example, or paying attention to a conversation. If you're talking to someone, but at the same time your mind starts wandering, or when you're watching, let's say, a movie or a newscast, and you watch for 2 or 3 minutes, and then you tune out because you start thinking about something else, you will miss what is being said to you. You will miss what you were just watching. There will be a gap in information processing in your mind and in your brain, for sure, 100%. Okay, and this happens exactly during driving, when people, let's say, start fiddling with changing radio stations, or playing with their phones, or engaging in conversations with let's say through Bluetooth connections, even though that's a little bit better, but you could still be distracted from the act of driving. And this is quite well studied, and it leads to distracted driving, leads to many accidents and many deaths on the roads every day in the world. So having said this, I want to play you a short clip. I'm just wondering if this is going to work, of an experiment that deals with attention. Let me set this up. No, I think I opened it, but I can't find it now. Okay, let's do this. Let's take a short break, because I can't find it now. Let's take a short break, because we are due for a break, 10 minutes, and I will find the video. It's like a minute video, and you have to engage in a specific task. It's with instructions, and I will play it after the break. All right? Okay. So let me pause. Okay, so I want you to follow instructions, okay? Watch and follow instructions. Can you hear it? Can you see it?
Can't hear it.
You can't hear it?
No.
Oh. Well, maybe not hearing is not such a big problem. Let me just 1 second. But you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, maybe because I need to unhook my. Okay, let's try it again.
Test.
What about now?
Yes, now I can.
So you're counting how many passes the team in white makes. Okay, focus.
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Did you see the moonwalking bear?
No.
I saw it.
Yeah, there you see it now because it's mentioned to you, right?
No, before you can also see it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Some people see it, some people don't. But how many people did not see the moonwalking bear?
I didn't.
I didn't.
Okay, so it's usually the case that quite a substantial number of people don't see the bear walking. And so that is what's called inattentional blindness. Selective, so we engage in selective attention. So that is, we can pay attention to only one stream of information at a time. We can't really pay attention to two streams of information with the same precision at the same time. It's just not possible. So that is why when you tune out of a conversation or when you stop watching a movie or when you stop paying attention to the road, especially when you're driving, you miss information that can get you into a lot of trouble. Or when you say to someone, "Oh, sorry, could you repeat that? Could you say that again? I didn't catch that. I didn't hear that. I was, I was distracted by something." That's exactly what happens, okay? Because we only pay attention to one stream of information at the same time, especially when the stream of information is demanding, cognitively demanding. That is, it requires a lot of energy to pay attention. Let's say, in this case, watching people and counting passes, okay? So it's usually a lot of people in such experiments, some people will catch a piece of information that is unconscious or invisible to other people. But such experiments show that quite a few of us miss this information, miss something that's right in the middle of our visual fields. So if we miss something that's right in the middle of our visual fields in such an experiment, imagine how many things you miss on regular basis in your daily lives, especially when you have to pay attention to one stream of information and something else is happening at the same time. So the lesson here is that whatever you do not pay attention to, you miss, you don't see. And that is true for vision, and that is true for hearing and other modalities. So that's why it is so important not to text and drive, or not to use handheld devices while driving or doing other tasks, because you are not paying attention to the road, and the road can be quite a dangerous place when you don't pay attention to it. You can find other examples of this on YouTube, but this is actually a very good example, and it's based on an experiment that was devised in 1999, and it's very close. The one that you saw is very close to the original. So the mechanism of attention, or the phenomenon of attention, works inside consciousness, and it works like a flashlight or a magnifying glass when it comes to paying attention to specific information. You basically magnify, or you put in spotlight what is important, and that which is not in the spotlight or under your scrutiny or magnifying glass, quote unquote, metaphorically, then that is not important, or much less important, and it does not figure in your conscious awareness. So this phenomenon is called inattentional blindness. There are other phenomena, for example, in experiments where a person asks for directions and then they are interrupted by, let's say, people who are working on the street, they're moving something, and then all of a sudden the person who comes back to the conversation is a different person from the person initially. And the person who's giving instructions on where to go or navigate through a city does not notice that the person afterwards is different from the person initially. So this is called change blindness. You change something in the visual field and you compare it to the visual field, or to the visual field prior, let's say prior to 10 seconds or a few seconds prior or later, that is. And this phenomenon is so significant that it has its own name, it has its own concept, but it's so pronounced that it can be exemplified through simple experiments, that people actually do not see what is in front of them or can't pay attention to information that is in front of them because they do not pay attention to that information. The person giving direction is so preoccupied with giving direction that he or she loses sight of the information, visual information that's changing in front of them, or in front of him or her, that is. Okay, any questions here? So another lesson here in terms of studying is when you're studying or trying to scrutinize information or to study complex information or to study for an exam, you can't be really watching a show in the background. You can't be really following a movie, and you can't be really responding to text messages on a regular basis because you're being continuously distracted. Stream of information that you are exposed to when you're studying is being cut, is being disrupted on a regular basis. So, and your attention is diverted to a different piece of information. And this really prevents you from proper studying or proper retention of information. Commonly, what we say, you're not being focused. That is why it's so important to be focused, because when you focus, you pay attention to and then what is in your attention, you can be aware of. And when you are aware of information, you can store it, you can retrieve it, you can analyze it, and you can have access to it, basically, cognitively. And when you don't pay attention to information, you don't have access to it. And when you don't have access to it, you don't store it, you don't retrieve it, and you don't quote unquote play around with it or think about it, because it's out of your mind, because it's out of your attention. So please keep that in mind. Here's another lesson from psychology, how to use this knowledge, these concepts, to improve your studying habits and other habits, in your daily lives. Okay, so let's now move on to sleeping and dreaming. So sleeping and dreaming are different states of consciousness. So consciousness has different content. Right now, you are focusing on a lecture, and this is one stream of information, and this stream of information has specific contents. And the content is composed of the various visual lecture slides, my voice, explanations, and maybe a couple of other things. Okay, that should be in your attention or in your focus. But the background is the state that you are in. So when you are conscious of various contents of consciousness, okay, you are in a given state of consciousness. And right now you are in a waking state of consciousness. You're not sleeping, you're not dreaming, you're not under the influence of drugs or anesthesia, okay? Those would be different states of consciousness. And different states of consciousness allow for different experiences of content of consciousness or lack of content altogether. So now you are in a wakeful state of consciousness. You are aware of yourself and of the environment around you. You are paying attention, and that is different from the state of consciousness when you are falling asleep or when you are asleep, when you are dreaming, or when you are, let's say, hypnotized, or when you are daydreaming, or when you are under the influence of specific drugs, okay? Okay, so sleeping and dreaming. So sleeping is a state of consciousness. It changes the nature of conscious awareness or experiences. So there are specific biological rhythms that operate in our bodies. And they allow for change between sleep patterns and wakeful states. And you can call these biological clocks, okay, regular bodily rhythms that occur every 24 hours cycles. And this changes with age. So for example, younger adults or teenagers or children or toddlers, let's say babies, sleep for a very long time. And then, in adolescent days or development, sleep patterns are still not as long as for babies or toddlers, but they are in the range of 7 to 10 hours. But once you get older, on average, people do not need to sleep as long. So the sleeping time might be cut from 7 to 9 hours or 10 hours to 5 to 8 hours, or some people just need 5 or 6 hours of sleep, and that changes with age. So according to developmental studies, you need less time to sleep as you age. So there is there is a negative correlation between age and hours of sleep. As age goes up, you need less sleep. There are different ways of measuring what happens in the body and in the brain while you sleep. So we have electroencephalogram that measures brain waves, global brain waves, and you can attach specific electrodes to your face, or specific parts of your face, that is cranium, so forehead, around the eyes. You detect muscle twitches in the eye, responses, tension in the face, and galvanic responses, sweating, resistance, that is skin conductance, that is and the effect of skin conductance is the amount of moisture on the skin. You can measure all of this with electrodes. So you put this on a subject or a patient, and then they try to fall asleep. And while they're sleeping, you basically monitor what's happening to them physiologically. So people who suffer from, let's say, insomnia or sleep apnea or narcolepsy will undergo such testing to So I should rephrase this. People who have sleeping problems but don't know exactly what's happening to them will undergo such testing so that later on it can be categorized, whether it's narcolepsy, or whether it's sleep apnea, or whether it's insomnia, or night terrors, or sleepwalking, or whether it is some sort of other disorder, or whether it's stress related or anxiety related that results in insomnia, let's say. So all of this information can be gathered from not just this test, other tests as well, but this is the beginning to find out exactly what's happening physiologically with a patient in order to help him or her. So when we sleep, we lose consciousness, but not entirely. And I will get to that in a second. So sleep goes through different stages. And this is actually new knowledge. It's not new knowledge that we sleep, or that there might be roughly different stages to sleep. But what happens in the brain, or what correlates, what information, what brain activity correlates with stages of sleep. And this was discovered in 1952 by a researcher who was working on an electroencephalogram, and he was experimenting with his son. And he noticed that when his son was dreaming, he noticed that after looking at the readings from the electroencephalogram, there were periods during the night where the activity of the brain was, when the brain was quite active, almost in the same way when the brain is active during typical wakeful states or typical consciousness. And that happens during REM sleep. And REM sleep is sometimes called paradoxical sleep, because during REM sleep, you are dreaming. You may have bizarre dreams, illogical dreams, fantastical dreams. You might be dreaming about everyday occurrences, which is called day residue. And I'm sure you have dreams. I'm sure you have had dreams about studying, or being preparing, or about lecture notes, or about going to school, or going to work, or meeting people. And that's just a reflection of your daily routine. That is reflected to some extent in your dream states. But sometimes our dream states are quite bizarre. You're flying, you're changing places around the world. There is no logical connection between different parts that exist in your dream state. So let's say, I remember when I was a kid, I used to dream about chocolate, and that my pillows were made out of chocolate, and the whole bed was made out of Jell-O and chocolate. And I was able to eat the Jell-O and chocolate whenever I wanted in my dreams. So that is, it's fantastical, maybe because I was going to sleep, maybe because I was hungry during sleep, maybe because I ate too much or ate too little before sleep. There could be different reasons, or because I really like chocolate and Jell-O and I was a kid. So that is no surprise. But I remember the dreams. I remember the content of my dreams. So you can see that many of the content that appears in our dreams is not compatible with reality. That is, logically speaking. Some elements are really out of context, or some elements are really misplaced or not connected logically at all, if you were to compare it to everyday life. But that's okay, and that is basically the nature of sleep, or sorry, dreaming, that is. So during REM sleep, physiologically and behaviorally, there is rapid eye movement. And this is a reoccurring sleep stage. And it correlates with specific vividness, dream vividness, or bizarreness, as I have just mentioned. And it's also known as paradoxical sleep because the muscles are relaxed in your body, except for minor twitches. But the other body systems are active. Your brain is quite active, but your body is more or less relaxed, except minor twitches. But upper eye movement refers to the movement of your eyes. So if you look at a person, if you were to look at a person as a bystander, objectively, who is sleeping, you could see that the eyeballs underneath their eyelids are moving back and forth frequently with short pauses. So that is distinct from other sleep stages. And then the recording, the EEG recording, the electroencephalogram recordings of global brain waves is quite different from other sleep stages. And it's different from other sleep stages, but it's quite similar to wakeful states, to brain activity that represents wakeful states. So when you are awake and you're falling asleep, the pattern of sleep stages is the following. So first you're relaxed in a relaxed state, or getting there, and you go through alpha waves, and then you're growing even more tired, and you go through. You start off with beta waves, then you go through alpha waves, then and then you go to delta waves, what's called deep sleep, and then at the end of that cycle you go into REM sleep. That state lasts for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then you go down again. Okay, so after you go through beta and alpha waves, you go into non-REM stage 1, then non-REM stage 2, then non-REM stage 3. Non-REM means a state that is not REM state. So you don't. So it's characterized by different brain waves, as you can see, N1, N2, and N3, that are quite different from REM states that are quite similar to wakeful states of consciousness. I just want to go back. So in 1 hour into a sleep cycle, an individual heads back to non-REM sleep 2 and 3, and then alpha waves, and then not into alpha waves, but then REM sleep, and then down again. Okay. So for 10 minutes, brain waves become rapid and similar to waves in non-REM sleep. And then during REM sleep, the heart rate rises, breathing becomes more rapid and irregular. The eyes dart around. Okay, this is what's called rapid eye movement, because they're darting around as if you were looking, as if a subject or a patient is looking at something, and this indicates the beginning of a dream state. So this is what this is what you would see on an electroencephalogram. It's basically a visual representation of what's happening in the brain, that is brain activity. And as you can see, when you are in a beta state, when you are alert, but then slowly moving into becoming more drowsy, that is, the frequency of brain waves as measured by the electroencephalogram are getting longer, and yeah, basically are getting slower and longer, as you can see. Okay, once you're in deep sleep, the activity, the physiological activity of your brain is quite different from when you are awake and during REM sleep. And that basically corresponds also with different, either with content. So during REM sleep, you dream. During deep sleep, you also dream, but not as vividly. Some people are also capable during REM sleep to be lucid. That is, they are capable of being aware that they're dreaming. And I used to have lucid dreams on a regular basis, but I do not have them. I haven't had them in a while. Do you lucid dream from time to time, or do you catch yourself being aware of the fact that you're dreaming?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that happens during REM sleep. And yeah, it's quite normal. And some people can even teach themselves to change the content of a dream. Sometimes you wake up and you can come back to the same content in a dream, but sometimes you can change the content in your dream by being lucid, by, you could say, being in control of your dream states. So during REM sleep, there are also other physiological, there are other physiological markers or indicators or behaviors. So let's say the genitals of both men and women are aroused, regardless of whether the dream content is sexual. Okay, so the dream content doesn't need to be sexual at all. The body goes through, you could say, these cycles of arousal during night. So when men wake up with an erection, that is because of REM sleep. Okay. So let's say if men wake up with an erection, that means in the morning, that means the last cycle that they went through, the most recent, what they most recently experienced was a dream state. The brain's motor cortex is active, but the brainstem blocks the messages, enabling relaxation of the muscles. Okay, so if in your dreams you are running, you're flying, you are hopping from one building to the next, or if you're, engaging in some sort of acrobatic behavior, then your brain is active as if it was actually engaging in such behavior. But the brainstem blocks messages, output messages. Motor neurons, output of motor neurons throughout the body, so that you are not, all of a sudden jumping up and down on your bed or falling off your bed. But I have fallen off my bed, and of course, some muscle activity is possible, and depending on how emotionally aroused or invested you are in your dreams, your body will more or less correspond. But usually what happens is your brainstem blocks the motor output, so that your body can actually be still, so that you can sleep, so that you're not moving around. That is, of course, different in people who are sleepwalkers. They move around, they walk around. I remember my cousin sleepwalking. We spent time together. Either he was sleeping at my place when I was a kid, or I was sleeping at his place. and we had different beds, but we would sometimes sleep in the same bedroom, and either at his place or my place. And I remember my cousin would sometimes get up and he would go to a closet and try to pee. Sometimes he would pee into the closet, and sometimes I was able to stop him because he would wake me up. Because when we are asleep, auditory information or sounds can wake you up. That's why an alarm clock wakes you up, or other sounds. So sometimes I was successful in stopping him from peeing into a closet, but sometimes I wasn't. Sometimes I was just asleep and I was not aware because I was in deep sleep. So that happens. And so some people are irregular cases, but for the most part, most of us are still, our bodies are still. But I remember episodes when I would swing my arm, during my sleep because I thought I was playing tennis. And because I play tennis almost on regular basis throughout the year, I dream about playing tennis, and I get all excited about waving my arm around and my tennis racket. And I have fallen off my bed a couple of times because I swung so hard, it pulled the rest of my body. And because I sleep usually right almost on the edge of my bed, I fell I fell a couple of times. Yeah. So then I started sleeping right in the middle of the bed, just in case, my arms have a mind of their own. So this happens, or when you sleep with a partner or wife or husband or whomever it may be, sometimes they hit you in the face, or you hit them in the face because you're dreaming about something, and you get invested, emotionally aroused, and or some people, and you hit them because they're close to you, or people sleep talk, right? They talk in their sleep, and they have conversations, with other people in their sleep. They're dreaming, and you wake them up. When you wake people up, and this has been corroborated by tests while people sleep. When you wake people up during REM sleep or right after REM sleep, they remember their dreams almost 90% of the time. But that's not the case on daily basis with us, or on regular basis when we sleep, because we don't want to be disturbed. That's not what a good night's sleep is. So when we wake up, sometimes we remember our dreams, but most of the time we don't remember our dreams. Okay, because there's it's a long lag between because we go through cycles of going into sleep, then deep sleep, then we have a short period of REM sleep when we dream, and then we get out of it and we go into different stages, and then we go back into REM sleep and that happens about 4 or 5 times a night. So cumulatively, you dream for about an hour or to 100 minutes a night. So that is one reason. That's not the only reason, but there is one reason why you don't remember your dreams, because it's not that you dream that you are in a dream state or in a REM state all throughout your night. That's not the case. You go through different stages of sleep, and they affect you differently. Okay. So here's another graph of young adults, let's say, who are between 15 to 20, and then older adults like myself, who are in their early 40s. You can see that the sleep patterns, or the patterns of going from wakeful states to REM states and back again, and so on and so forth. Well, not the wakeful states, but the REM states. So you start with a waking state, and you go all the way down to N3, which is deep sleep. And then you come out of deep sleep, and you go back to REM sleep. You can see that REM sleep is the shortest in duration of all the sleep stages, and then you go back into deep sleep again. So you can see that the cycles in young adults are longer. So young adults will go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 6 cycles a night. Older adults, and I can attest to this, will go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 cycles, more frequent cycles, and therefore shorter cycles of going into deep sleep and then REM sleep, deep sleep, and REM sleep. And some people in their 60s, 70s, or 80s might require even less sleep, or they will wake up more frequently during the night. Okay. Any questions here? Just checking time.
I couldn't see any one of those sleep-related contents in my textbook. Will it be the thing that we can see on the test?
Hold on a second. I'm just going to plug in my charger. How do I make this bigger? It's always this thing confused. Okay, say that again.
I couldn't find anything about this content which is related to the sleeping thingy.
In the book, in your book?
Oh yes, sir. This one.
But do you have the most current book? Do you have the book that I...
Yeah, it's 5th edition.
Okay. Psychology in Everyday Life by De Wall and Myers and De Wall?
Yes, sir.
But you have it's and published by Macmillan?
Oh.
Yeah, you have a different book, yes. So I suggest you get the online version of the book. Yeah. And it's there, it's all there, because the lecture notes are based on the readings, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay, but make sure you get it and you start using it. But this content is this is common knowledge now in psychology texts, and it should appear pretty much in every decent or good introduction to psychology text. Okay, let's move on. So there are specific hormones or neurotransmitters that are responsible for triggering sleep, and melatonin is responsible for that, along with other mechanisms in human beings. So when there's no melatonin production, when we are stimulated by light, there is a blockage of melatonin production in the brain, and when night falls, there is release of melatonin production, and that enters the bloodstream. Okay. So the suprachiasmic nucleus. So when light strikes the eye, eye's retinas are in the back of the eye. the suprachiasmatic nucleus suppresses production of sleep hormone melatonin, okay? But when night hits or night falls, that is, the suprachiasmatic nucleus quiets down and allows for the release of melatonin into bloodstream. Okay, so that is the mechanism of falling asleep and staying asleep. And some people take melatonin supplements, especially those who have problems falling asleep or problems with insomnia. Usually 5 milligrams is fine. But if you don't have to take melatonin, don't take it. But if you really need it, then take it. Well, you don't really have to take it from me, but a similar advice, you will hear similar advice from your doctor. But it does help. But I would say use stuff like that only when you have to. Otherwise, if you have a restless night, then just go through it. Let your body, if you have a restless night, just write it out, and then you will sleep it off the next night. So it's much better to let your brain regulate itself naturally without taking supplements or other drugs or sleeping pills. Unless you can't fall asleep for, let's say, 5 or 7 days in a row, then you really, if it's one sleepless night here, sporadically, that's fine. Your brain will work this out. Will manage. Will catch up on sleep the next night or the night after. So there are different theories why we sleep. One theory could be that we sleep in order to protect. So when you think about hunter-gatherers, prehistoric men, men would go into caves or hiding from animals, predators. So sleeping is a way of removing oneself or themselves from a dangerous environment, and then being active again during the day. Sleep helps in recovery, and that is true. If you sustain specific injuries, if you are sick, sleep is actually very important, because the body goes through specific recovery modes or specific recovery activity where the body is replenished, and therefore it goes through recovery. Basically, the body is being repaired. So that is another way of explaining the function of sleep. So the one function is to protect life, the other one is to help the body recover, and that is true. Yet another way is to look at sleep as restoring and rebuilding memories, and that is also partly true. Solidifying memory. Sleep is important for solidifying memory. So when you study for an exam, the information that you read when you're studying is solidified in memory partly through sleep. So sleep really helps crystallize or solidify, as we say in psychology, memories, so that it moves information from short-term memory or working memory to long-term memory. And when you are sleep deprived, that does not happen, or does not happen as successfully, and that is reflected in test scores. Students do worse long-term when students are sleep deprived. So proper sleep or proper sleep patterns are vital for cognitive function. And since cognitive function is very important, or proper cognitive function is very important for studying, because studying is quite demanding cognitively. Sleep deprivation leads to bad results. Bad cognitive results, test results, but also not only that, but it also affects your mood states, ability to concentrate, and yeah, mood swings. But I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that a bit more in just a few minutes. Sleep feeds creative thinking. So during sleep or during dreaming, there is quite a bit of processing in the brain, as you can see from electroencephalograms. And part of this processing is to solve problems, is to think about the content or information that you gathered through waking states. So the information that you gather now through lecture, through reading, through studying content for your psychology class or different classes is going to be to some extent recycled, reused in your dream states. And that is good for memory, and that is good for problem solving or coming up with novel solutions. And sleep supports growth, biological growth. So children grow during sleep. And this makes sense because during sleep, the brain goes through repair and replenishing mode, or stages, and which are very important for growth, bodily growth. So those are the theories and positive effects of sleep. The lack of sleep or sleep deprivation leads to mood disorders, irritability, stress, anxiety, frustration, lower resistance to infection. So even infections to viruses like common flu viruses is higher. You are more susceptible to viruses on a regular basis when you are sleep deprived, because when you're sleep deprived, your body, your organism does not go through the typical restoring, replenishing, repairing modes, and which leads to higher infection rates, because your immune system is not as strong, is not replenished, is not restored, is not basically it doesn't function as well as it's supposed to when your body or someone else's body or our bodies are sleep deprived. So you can see that there are all these benefits due to proper sleep or healthy sleep patterns. Athletes who sleep well on a regular basis perform better. Okay, they make better decisions, quicker decisions. They have better motor outputs. So athletes like Roger Federer, well-known tennis professional, who's currently recovering from surgery, but knee surgery, but he claims that he tries to sleep between 10 to 12 hours in a 24-hour clock. So that means he goes through a regular night of sleep, and he also naps during the day. And napping for anywhere between half an hour to hour and a half is actually quite good for you. Through napping, you can catch up on sleep that you have missed during the night. And you can also add additional recuperation or replenishing or repair mode during the day, in addition to when you are asleep. So do take care of your sleep patterns, treat it very seriously, because when you are sleep deprived, that spells, you know, bad news for you. There are more accidents on the roads due to sleep deprivation. This has been well tested with drivers, especially truck drivers. Reduced school performance, as I said, you know, reduced cognitive performance. So analyzing concepts, memory, thinking, and you also gain weight because there's more cortisol in your bloodstream, because you are active, you are under stress, and higher cortisol levels correlate with fat cells in your body. So technologies such as cell phones are pretty bad for us in general. People who invented cell phones were not thinking about psychological well-being, definitely. So that's why we say things like in psychology, great sleep recession. We are in a great sleep recession, and young adults report more sleep-related problems than in previous years or previous generations, and that is mainly due to staying up late, you know, using your cell phone. Blue light that's emitted from your cell phone is bad. That is, it's bad in terms of keeping you up. It prevents the release of melatonin, as you have just found out, and it keeps your brain active instead of relaxing before you go to sleep. So I don't keep my cell phone in the bedroom. I keep the cell phone in the kitchen. It's not anywhere near where I'm sleeping. So it doesn't, so the radiation that's emitted through the cell phone doesn't bother me, because that bothers the body and the heart as well, you should know. And I'm not distracted visually by the light that might be emitted from the cell phone, or any sound from the cell phone, or any vibrations from the cell phone while I'm sleeping. So I'm not sleep deprived. So my advice to you, based on the psychological research, is don't keep the cell phone in your bedroom or anywhere close to you, but ideally just remove it from the bedroom and use something else as an alarm clock, or set the alarm clock pretty loud, so that you can hear it through an open door from the neighboring room on your cell phone, so that it can wake you up. Or just use other devices to alarm clocks, simple alarm clocks, because the cell phone is really not your friend, unfortunately. The other source of tiredness is people spend too much time on their computers and too much time binge watching shows, and also playing video games. So if you're going hardcore with video games, playing video games before you fall asleep, then that's going to affect you. You're definitely going to be active. You're definitely going to be aroused and engaged, or sleeping about playing video games. And it's also the light that's emitted from your computer and cell phone and TV that's a problem. So my advice to you, based on the psychological research, is to keep that stuff away. And also, keeping your cell phone in your pocket is bad for you, because the cell phone emits radiation. If you're keeping your cell phone close to your genitals, that's not a good idea. If you're keeping your cell phone close to your heart in a pocket somewhere, that's not a good idea. So yeah, try to keep the cell phone as far as you can from your body, because it's not healthy for you long term. Which is quite ironic, because we are quite attached to our cell phones these days, right? It's difficult for us to imagine life without cell phones. That's the irony. But to be healthy and to sleep well, I recommend strongly to have a detached relationship to your cell phone as opposed to an attached relationship to your cell phone. But I leave that with you and do as you will, but here are a few lessons, okay? So as you can see, sleep deprivation affects many organs and many parts of your body. The brain, as I have just said, sleep deprivation leads to mood disorders, irritability, states of depression or higher risk of depression, weight gain, and loss of cognitive abilities, or reduction in cognitive abilities, thinking, language, studying, memory, or sorry, cognitive abilities that we use for studying on a regular basis. It reduces the ability of your immune system to fight infection. Okay, so your immune system is replenished and restored when you sleep. Okay, and a healthy immune system is vital for your health. Fat cells, obesity, so sleep deprivation is correlated positively with obesity. Inflammation in joints and arthritis. Okay, since your body is not going through, during sleep is not going through, or does not go through proper replenishment, restoration, and repair, it can't fight off inflammation or arthritis in your joints, which is due to inflammation. Heart, increased risk of high blood pressure because you're active. When you're cognitively active, the body is awake, you're not sleeping, then your body works differently or goes into overdrive the way it does during quite stressful situations. So you can see all of your organs, all the organs in your body, that is, require a rest state, and the rest states usually take place while you are dreaming. Stomach, there's an increase of the hormone ghrelin, which stimulates hunger, and decrease in the hunger suppressing hormone leptin. So when you're sleep deprived, you are more likely to munch on various things. Muscles reduce muscle reduction in terms of strength. So strength reduction, because muscles do not go through the typical recuperation period, and therefore there's slower reaction time and learning and motor learning or output. So that is why it is so important to sleep, and that's why professional athletes maintain quite a rigorous lifestyle so that they can sleep on a regular basis and their bodies can recuperate properly to be much tough for the next day. Okay, so all of these are all, you can see that there are quite a few advantages to proper sleeping cycles, and in the immediate and disadvantages due to sleep deprivation. So some of the disorders, checking the time, sleep disorders that are quite common, so insomnia, just basically inability to fall asleep. Narcolepsy, sleep disorders in which a person has uncontrollable sleep attacks, sometimes lapsing directly into REM sleep. So, this is very dangerous for people who or professional drivers. If you're a professional driver or operating heavy machinery or working at a construction site and you suffer from narcolepsy, you could kill yourself or you could kill someone else, basically. So it can be quite dangerous depending on the context. Sleep apnea, sleep disorders in which a sleeping person repeatedly stops breathing until blood oxygen level is so low the person awakens just long enough to draw a breath. So this is due to problems in the nasal passages, and people who suffer from sleep apnea also gain quite a bit of weight for the reasons that I have just mentioned, and they have to wear specific masks to regulate breathing in nasal passages. So what are some natural sleep aids? I have mentioned a few already, but so keep the cell phone away as far as possible. Let your body rest, let your mind and your brain rest. Exercise on a regular basis, sweat it out on a regular basis, going to the gym, working out, going for a long walk. Don't work out at night, or don't work out or perform extraneous exercises before you go to sleep, because that will just make you active. Your central nervous system will be quite active. So in the morning or later in the afternoon is good, but not before you go to sleep or just before you go to sleep. You know, avoid caffeine intake later in the evening or before bedtime. A glass of milk is good. It's an old remedy, but it works well with the production of melatonin in your brain. Serotonin and also melatonin. Relax before bedtime. You know, shut off the lights. Have a regular sleeping schedule. If you want to sleep longer, then try to go to sleep not 2 hours earlier, because that's going to be harder because of your sleeping schedule, but try to go 15 minutes earlier or 30 minutes earlier, and you will see that incrementally you will be able to extend your sleeping for 45 minutes or an hour, and that is a lot. That is a boost, a big boost to your sleeping pattern. And if you have from time to time sleepless nights, or you fidget and you don't really sleep that well, maybe once a week or twice bi-weekly, then that's fine. I mean, that happens to me on a regular basis, and that is nothing out of the ordinary. Because when you are a healthy adult, then your brain will regulate itself. So if you have a sleepless night, if you had a sleepless night last night, tonight or the next night, you will catch up. Either you will nap or you will have a really good night's sleep the night after. And that is normal. And if you have problems falling asleep, then just focus your mind on non-arousing, engaging thoughts, such as, you know, you can think about song lyrics or a vacation you want to travel. Just, you know, some people count sheep or count backwards, you know, from 2000 or 1000 or 100, you know, 99, 98, 97, you know, that's pretty monotone and boring. And that could put you to sleep. But when we are stressed out, when, you know, our lives are filled with, you know, professional activities or school-related activities, that's quite stressful. So it's normal if sometimes it's harder to fall asleep because you are anxious about a test or exam or project, or maybe a relationship or other events, that is normal. But if you nevertheless are getting a good 6 to 8 hours a night of sleep, and you're not waking up 6 or 7 times during a night, then you're good. Then you're getting enough rest, recuperation, replenishment during the night. And you can also manage stress throughout the day. Life is stressful in itself. But you can monitor, you can manage your stress. You can, if some people in your life are stress inducing, if they cause you more stress and you can avoid them, then do that. If your friends really have a negative effect on you and they stress you out more than help you or make you happy, then stay away from them. So basically, you won't be able to avoid all stressful situations in life, because that's not possible. And on a regular basis, you need to face stressful situations. That's normal. That's how you learn. That's how you build resilience, and that's how you learn how to overcome problems in your life. So you need to deal with stress on a regular basis. This is nothing new. I'm sure you know how to do this, more or less. Some of you better, some of you a little bit less, but you're learning, and I'm learning as well. But you can notice instances or people or activities or instances, moments where you could maybe avoid. So if spending time with some people causes you more stress, more anxiety, more emotional problems than the opposite, then it's a quick lesson. Just stay away from them or reduce them. Don't give them lots of time. If they're affecting you negatively, and because of them you are stressed out, stay away from them. Make new friends, new acquaintances. Spend time with yourself where you are less stressed out. So you can do such things. You can pick, you can navigate the world or the sea of stress. You can learn how to manage it better. If specific profession or specific activities irritate you to the point where it's debilitating, then stay away from them. Now, school and professional life can be quite stressful, and we all need to learn how to overcome it and manage it, and that is a positive thing, because that is a skill that you acquire throughout life, early in your adulthood, so that it can help you later in your life, and that is a good thing. But if let's say police officers or nurses or other professions go through a high rate of burnout, then that tells you something about the nature of the job. Some professions are good for some people, some personalities, or some people with specific temperaments, and some professions are not so good. Some people deal with stress better, some people deal with stress a bit worse. So you need to also monitor, you need to watch yourself, in what situations you perform better, what are some instances where you can, people or events you can avoid, or maybe change your routines. And this way you can navigate through stress or manage stress better. But, stress is just it's part of life. It's quite normal, and you can't run away from it. You can only learn how to deal with it. Anyway, we'll talk about stress when we get to that chapter more, that is. We'll spend more time. Okay, any questions?
Professor, do we have another class with you, like next term or next year? Because your class is extremely engaging, that's why.
Okay, thank you for saying that. I don't know. I don't think I'm with you next term.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm being borrowed for this term, for this program. But I might come back maybe to teach a course, a degree course later on. But I'm not scheduled to teach next term.
Okay.
Yeah, but thank you for saying that. Now let's just say a few things about dreams, and then we'll call it a day. So dreams, as you can see, are part of our sleeping cycles on a nightly basis or daily basis. If you're napping, you also go through dreams or states of dreaming. And dream states occur during REM sleep. Remember that. And so just as researchers are interested in the function of sleep, researchers are also interested in the function of dreaming, or why we dream. We actually don't know why we dream, but there are a few theories out there why we dream. So one theory is to satisfy our wishes, and that was the psychoanalytic. This was born of the psychoanalytic tradition advocated by Sigmund Freud, to file away memories. This is actually more compatible with current research on the advantages of sleep, especially for memory, to develop and preserve neural pathways, to establish neural pathways, crystallize neural pathways in the brain, to make sense of neural static, to basically make sense of neural information processing or neural activity. So let's say, according to one theory, activity in the brainstem going upwards through the limbic system into the neocortex, brain activity is interpreted by the neocortex in the form of a dream. So if there is irregular brainstem activity moving upwards in the brain or back and forth through the brain, then the neocortex, what the neocortex does is it interprets the brain activity triggered by the brainstem. So if there is irregular activity coming from the brainstem, then this would be reflected in illogical and irregular or bizarre dreams produced or triggered by other parts of the brain, like the neocortex. So the neocortex, one of the responsibilities of the neocortex is to interpret the brain signals or activity from lower parts of the brain, like the brainstem and the limbic system. And this is just a theory. It's not, it's debatable whether that's actually the case. But that's just one theory out there, and that it has its own evidence or arguments. And also dreams reflect cognitive development. So when you're a child, you have childlike dreams. And when you are an adult, you have adult-like dreams. So if you think about the dreams that you have in your adult life, you can notice that your adult life is represented in your dreams. The content that's in your dreams is compatible with your age, basically, or adult life. So as adults, you will dream about adult matters, relationships, professional matters, student life, and the combination of the 3 or 4 elements together. Planning for the future. Maybe some people want to have kids, so they'll dream about that. Okay, so children don't think about having kids when they're 4 or 5 because that's not the stage of life that they experience or go through. Adults do. Adults stress over professional matters or matters of relationship, and that is reflected in their dreams. So I think this theory makes more sense than, for example, the second to last theory, to make sense of neural static or neural activity. But it is true that different brain parts during sleep or during dreaming are active, and other brain parts or other brain regions react to information that they receive. So making sense also makes sense to some extent, but some theories here will ring true more than others, or will be will yield the positive or accurate results through empirical testing. So if there's a theory, then if researchers or psychologists have theories, then the other or hypotheses, the next step is to basically test whether that's actually true, or whether there is any way of testing to corroborate, to vindicate, to prove that a theory or a hypothesis is true or rings true. Okay, just a few more minutes. So, as you can see, I have mentioned quite a few things about dreaming, or that is sleep and dreaming as well. But even if you don't really have to rely on psychology texts, you can just self-reflect and think about the content of your dreams, and kind of monitor yourself, and and when you do that, when you focus on that, you realize that a lot of your dreams are composed of snapshots of images that are either important to you or not important to you. Some dreams have narratives, some dreams are like stories, so that they make, to some extent, stories make logical sense, but maybe you're having a conversation with someone, or maybe you're solving a problem. But if you have a dream that you have a conversation with someone while you're floating on, I don't know, on something that is made out of chocolate or Jello, to take a lesson from my dream states when I was a kid, then of course that does not match reality, right? But you can see that some elements match reality and some elements will be bizarre, completely fantastical. And that is normal. That is also the nature of dream states. So, as I said, dreams feature also people and places from one's daily sexual or non-sexual experiences. So this proves that the Freudian theory that dream states are about manifest sexual desires is not necessarily true. And actually, it turns out that very little of our dream states are related to sexual activity or sexual desires or sexual content. Okay, sorry, I skipped the slide, that's why. So the first theory was dream states we dream because in order to satisfy our wishes, let's say sexual wishes. And here's some arguments or evidence that's probably not the case. Even though some of the content that appears in our dreams may be related to sexual wishes, there are far fewer in between, and there are also other ways of explaining why we dream, what we dream, or how we dream, as opposed to only through the prism of sexual desires or wish fulfillments. So the other theory was that we dream in order to process information. So during dreaming, we sift, sort, and secure the daily events in an individual's memory. So this rings true to some extent. Sleep improves our memory. It allows us to move information from short-term memory to long-term memory, and that improves also storage and retrieval of memory. And retrieval of memory is basically the ability to retrieve, to pull out information from memory. The other theory that I have mentioned stresses preserving or solidifying neural pathways. So dreams may be important for paving neural pathways by stimulating experiences. You could have various experiences during sleep that could do this. Our dreams can be charged emotionally. We could be solving problems. You could be in your dream states doing various things, cognitive, emotional, perceptual, and when you do this strengthens specific neural pathways in your brain that are used or will be used for solving specific problems or addressing specific issues in your daily lives. So making sense of neural static, I have explained this already. And the last one is reflecting cognitive development. And I have already mentioned that when you mature, you go through specific stages of development. The stages of development that you go through are reflected in the content of your dreams. So again, as a child, when you're 4 or 5, you don't stress over giving presentations or performing at work or finishing a specific project or putting a presentation together for your classes or studying for an exam. That is something you do when you're a young adult and also fully an adult. But not as a child. As a child, you might be dreaming about, I don't know, a movie or a cartoon or an animated feature or a t-shirt or a unicorn, or maybe going to the swimming pool. I mean, you could also dream about going to the swimming pool or having fun at the swimming pool with other kids or other adults or with your kids when you're an adult. But dreams like this are definitely more frequent, more probable for kids than adults, because adults have different lives from children, and that is basically it, and that seems to be clear. Okay, I think that is it for today. Sorry, I'm just going to go back. Are there any questions?
Can I understand this content as dreams cannot be observed, but we can only observe in indirect ways such as REM wave or other type of brain waves, so we can make some serious but not low.
So your question is, can we directly observe dream states or the neural activity, or?
I mean, to understand the thing what we have learned today, can I comprehend it as, sorry, just I get distracted, so I think this question couldn't be reminded.
It's okay, it happens to me too. It's normal. Is there another way you can put it?
Well, we cannot observe sleep just like unlike nature events. So
Yeah, that's true. So,
that's all I wanted to say and ask.
oh,
So,
okay. Yeah, because when we dream, we have to be in a specific state of consciousness. And so, yeah, but nevertheless, we observe, we have the kind of first person or immediate subjective experience of dreams when we are during REM sleep. In the same way, we observe reality the way you observe reality right now unfolding in front of you. You also have a first person direct subjective experience. So I guess that's the only thing. So there is an overlap. I mean, anything that happens in your consciousness, you have direct access to. The only thing that you don't have access to is the brain activity, because when you are a conscious subject, you have access to the world of your body and of your mind and what's happening outside of your mind. But everything that's happening outside of your mind is, of course, filtered through your senses and your brain, right? So that is a subjective state or a first-person state, what we say a first-person state in psychology or philosophy, or a subjective state. And we have immediate access to this information. And because dreams take part in consciousness or take part in our minds, we have direct access to them. But when that happens, we don't have direct access to brain states. So we don't know exactly what brain states correlate or are direct causes of specific mental states or states of consciousness. And that is why we have the mind-body problem, to figure out what is the exact relationship between brain states and mind states or states of consciousness. And we're not going to solve this problem anytime soon, but we're getting better and better at it, as you can see, because there's more and more information in psychology and neuroscience and also philosophy about such topics. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that is a bit of a commentary on your question. Are there any other questions? Okay. All right. So thank you. And next week we will go to sensations and perceptions. So please read ahead. And that's it. So thank you and enjoy your weekend. Sleep well, study hard, and I'll see you next week. Take care.
Bye, sir.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Take care.